Imagine standing at the absolute edge of existence, watching the final second of time tick away. Not your time, not humanity's time, time itself. The dimension that makes change possible, that separates past from future, that allows you to read this sentence before the next one. Stephen Hawking spent decades calculating exactly what happens in that unimaginable moment when time doesn't just stop, but ceases to exist as a dimension of reality. And what he discovered is so disturbing, so beautiful, and so inevitable that it will change how you experience every moment you have left. Before we journey to the end of everything, smash that subscribe button right now. Because what you're about to learn isn't just theoretical physics. It's the final chapter of the only story that's ever mattered. The story of time itself. And trust me, you need to hear how it ends. Let me ask you something that probably keeps you up at night if you really think about it. When you imagine the future, how far ahead do you go? Tomorrow? Next year? The end of your life? Maybe you've thought about the heat death of the sun, or the eventual extinction of humanity. But have you ever truly confronted the idea that time itself, the very fabric that allows next to follow now, will one day simply not exist anymore? Not frozen, not paused, but gone as a dimension of reality? Stephen Hawking did more than confront this idea. He calculated it. He mapped out the mathematical progression from now to then, from the present moment to the moment when the concept of moments becomes meaningless. And the journey he described is unlike anything our everyday experience prepares us for. This isn't just about things ending. It's about the framework in which endings can happen itself, coming to an end. Before we dive deeper, I'm curious, where are you watching this from right now? Drop your location in the comments below. I want to know where in the world people are contemplating the end of time itself. Are you in Tokyo, Toronto, São Paulo? Let me know, because what we're exploring transcends every boundary except the ultimate one, the boundary of time itself. Hawking identified that there are fundamentally different ways time could end, and each one reveals something profound about the nature of time itself. The first scenario, and perhaps the most discussed, is what's called the Big Freeze, or heat death. Here's how Hawking described it. The universe continues expanding forever, driven by dark energy. Galaxies drift apart. Stars exhaust their fuel and die. New stars stop forming because all the available hydrogen gets locked up in stellar remnants. White dwarfs, neutron stars, black holes. Even these decay over incomprehensible timescales. Protons might decay. Black holes evaporate through Hawking radiation. Eventually, you reach a state where the universe is a cold, dark, infinitely dispersed sea of particles so far apart they might as well not exist. The temperature approaches absolute zero. Energy gradients disappear, and here's where it gets truly strange. Without energy gradients, without structure, without anything changing or capable of changing, what does time even mean? Hawking's insight was that time is fundamentally connected to change, to entropy increasing, to events happening in sequence. In a universe that has reached maximum entropy, where nothing can change anymore because there's no available energy to drive change, time doesn't exactly end. It becomes meaningless. The dimension still exists mathematically, but it's not measuring anything. It's like having a ruler in a universe with no distance, or a clock in a universe with no events. This is profoundly different from time stopping. If time stopped, there would be a last moment, a final now, frozen forever. But in the Big Freeze scenario, time continues in some abstract sense. The universe keeps existing. It's just that nothing happens, ever again. It's existence without experience, duration without change, being without becoming. Hawking described this as the loneliest possible fate for the universe. Not destruction, but endless, meaningless persistence. Every structure that ever existed, every pattern, every bit of organization dissolved into uniform, maximum entropy nothingness. And crucially, no observer could exist to experience this state, because observers require structure, energy gradients, the ability to process information, all of which are gone. Think about that for a moment. The universe doesn't end in oblivion. It ends in a state where it still exists, but is incapable of supporting anything interesting. No life, no structure, no change, no time in any meaningful sense. Just eternal, cold, dark, structureless existence. Hawking found this scenario mathematically beautiful in its simplicity, but philosophically horrifying in its implications. But there's another possibility that Hawking explored extensively, one that's more dramatic and perhaps easier to comprehend: the Big Crunch. In this scenario, if the universe contains enough matter and energy, its expansion will eventually stop, reverse, and turn into contraction. Everything will begin falling back together. Galaxies will collide and merge. Space itself will shrink. The cosmic microwave background radiation, currently a cold 2.7 Kelvin, will heat up as it's compressed. As the universe contracts, it gets denser and hotter. Stars begin to overlap. Eventually, individual structures like galaxies and solar systems cease to have meaning, because everything is crushed together. The temperature rises to millions, then billions of degrees. Atoms are torn apart. Even atomic nuclei break down into their constituent quarks. And then, according to general relativity, space-time itself is crushed into a singularity, a point of infinite density and infinite curvature where the equations break down. This is where time actually ends, not by becoming meaningless, but by being compressed out of existence along with space. The dimension of time reaches a final moment, and then simply isn't part of reality's geometry anymore. Hawking spent years trying to understand what happens at this singularity. Does time reverse? Does it become imaginary in a mathematical sense? Does the universe bounce and begin a new cycle? His mathematics suggested something strange. Near the singularity, the distinction between time and space breaks down. Time becomes space-like, meaning it behaves more like a spatial dimension. You could theoretically move backward or forward in it, except you can't, because you and everything else has been crushed to nothing. The Big Crunch represents a true end of time. There is a final moment. After that final moment, the question what happens next is meaningless because next requires time, and time no longer exists. It's not that something prevents things from happening after. It's that after is not a concept that applies. The temporal dimension has ended. Where are you watching from, by the way? I asked before, but I want to check in again. Drop your location in the comments. This conversation about time's ending is universal, literally. And I'm curious how people across different cultures and backgrounds are processing these ideas. Now let me tell you about the third scenario Hawking analyzed, the most violent and disturbing one, the Big Rip. This possibility emerged from observations that the universe's expansion is accelerating. Dark energy is pushing everything apart faster and faster. If this acceleration continues and strengthens, which some models predict, it leads to a catastrophic ending. In the Big Rip scenario, the acceleration becomes so extreme that it eventually overcomes all the forces holding structures together. First, galaxy clusters are torn apart. Then individual galaxies. Then solar systems. Then planets. Then molecules. Then atoms. And in the final fraction of a second before the rip completes, even space-time itself is shredded. Subatomic particles are ripped apart. The very geometry of space tears like fabric. Hawking found this scenario particularly fascinating because it represents a breakdown not just of structures, but of physical law itself. At the moment of the Big Rip, causality fails. The concept of events influencing other events becomes meaningless because no signal can propagate from one point to another when space itself is being torn apart faster than light can travel. Time doesn't just end in the Big Rip, it fragments and loses coherence. Before the final rip, you'd have regions of space-time that are causally disconnected, unable to influence each other, existing in their own isolated bubbles of reality. Then those bubbles themselves are torn apart, and whatever that final state is, it's not describable by our current physics. Time as a dimension breaks down completely. What makes Hawking's analysis of these scenarios so powerful is that he didn't just describe them physically. He explored their implications for the nature of time itself. He asked, what is time, fundamentally? Is it a dimension like space? Is it emergent from something more basic? Can it end, and if so, what does that ending mean? His answer, developed over decades of work, is subtle and profound. Time is real, but it's not fundamental in the way we naively think. It's intimately connected to the existence of structure, entropy gradients, causality, and the possibility of change. In situations where these features break down, whether it's the heat death of the Big Freeze, the singularity of the Big Crunch, or the fragmentation of the Big Rip, time loses its meaning or ceases to exist. This has staggering implications for how we think about existence. We assume time is an absolute background against which events occur. But Hawking showed that time itself is contingent, dependent on the physical state of the universe. It had a beginning with the Big Bang, and it will have an ending in one of these scenarios. Time is not eternal. It's a feature of a particular phase of cosmic history. Let me pause here and ask for your reaction. Does knowing that time itself is temporary, that it will end just as surely as it began, does that change how you feel about the present moment? Drop a comment right now, because we're about to explore the deepest implications of time's mortality, and I want to hear how you're processing this. One of Hawking's most profound insights about time's ending relates to the arrow of time, the fact that time flows in one direction. We remember the past, but not the future. Eggs break, but don't spontaneously reassemble. Entropy increases. Hawking proposed that this arrow is connected to the expansion of the universe. As long as space expands, entropy increases and time flows forward. But what happens when the universe stops expanding or starts contracting? Does the arrow of time reverse? Hawking initially speculated yes. If the universe begins contracting in a Big Crunch scenario, entropy might decrease, and cause and effect might flip. The future would determine the past. Events would happen in reverse sequence from our perspective. He later retracted this idea, concluding that the arrow of time would continue pointing forward even during contraction. But the very fact that he seriously considered time reversal shows how deeply he questioned our assumptions. Time's direction, like its existence, is tied to the physical state of the universe. It's not an absolute feature of reality. This connects to another question Hawking explored. Do we experience time's flow, or does time itself flow? Physics actually doesn't distinguish between past and future at a fundamental level. The equations work the same in both directions. The arrow of time emerges from thermodynamics and entropy, not from time itself having a preferred direction. So when time ends, what ends? Not some cosmic river that's been flowing, but rather the conditions that allow entropy to increase, that allow events to be ordered into before and after, that allow change to occur. When those conditions disappear, whether through heat death, crunch, or rip, time doesn't stop flowing. The concept of flow itself becomes inapplicable. Hawking also explored what information, if any, survives time's ending. This connects to his famous work on black holes and the information paradox. If time ends in a big crunch singularity, is information preserved in some form, or is it destroyed? If it's destroyed, that violates quantum mechanics. If it's preserved, where and how? His eventual answer, never fully satisfactory even to him, was that information might be encoded in the boundary conditions of the universe in the quantum state describing the singularity. But this requires a theory of quantum gravity we don't yet have. The fate of information at time's end remains one of the deepest unsolved problems in physics. For the Big Freeze scenario, information is preserved but becomes useless. It's spread out over such vast distances, encoded in such dilute quantum states, that no process could ever gather and decode it. The information about everything that ever happened still exists in principle, but it might as well not exist because nothing can access it. For the Big Rip, it's unclear whether information can even be defined once space-time itself is torn apart. Hawking's mathematics suggested that the Big Rip represents a genuine breakdown of physical law, including information conservation. If so, then time's ending in this scenario also means the ending of the past, because information about the past is destroyed. These possibilities troubled Hawking deeply. He spent his career trying to prove that information is always conserved, that the past always leaves traces, that history is never truly erased. But confronting time's ending forced him to acknowledge that in sufficiently extreme scenarios, our cherished principles might fail. Let me share my personal perspective on this, and I really want to hear what you think. I believe that understanding time's ending makes every moment infinitely more precious. Not just our personal moments, but the entire duration of time itself is a finite gift. The universe won't last forever. Time won't last forever. This cosmic deadline, unimaginably distant though it is, frames all of existence as a unique, never-to-be-repeated event. What do you think? Does knowing that time itself is mortal make existence feel more meaningful or less? Does it change your priorities, your values, your sense of what matters? Comment below, because I think how we respond to time's mortality reveals something deep about how we find meaning. Now let's explore what Hawking said about consciousness and time's ending. This is speculative territory, but fascinating, If consciousness requires time, the ability to experience one moment after another, to have thoughts in sequence, to remember the past and anticipate the future, then consciousness cannot survive time's ending. When time becomes meaningless in the big freeze, when it's compressed to nothing in the big crunch, when it fragments in the big rip, consciousness ends not because there's nothing to be conscious of, but because the temporal structure consciousness requires no longer exists. This means that in a very real sense, the universe's ability to know itself, to observe itself, to experience itself, is temporary. For most of cosmic history, before life evolved and after it ends, the universe exists but is not experienced. There's no witness, no perspective, no interiority. Just patterns of matter and energy evolving according to physical law, with no one to observe them. Hawking found this both humbling and empowering. Humbling because it shows how contingent and temporary consciousness is on cosmic scales. But empowering because it means that right now, in this brief window of cosmic history, when consciousness exists, we're the universe's only way of knowing itself. We're not observers of the universe. We're the universe observing itself. And when time ends, that self-awareness ends too. This raises the question, could advanced civilizations do anything to survive time's ending? Could they find a way to preserve consciousness, information structure, even as the universe moves toward its final state? Hawking was skeptical. The laws of thermodynamics seem inexorable. Entropy must increase. Available energy must decrease. Eventually, no matter how clever you are, there's simply no energy left to run a computer, power a brain, or maintain any structure capable of thought. But he acknowledged we can't be certain. Maybe in the far future, civilizations will discover loopholes in the laws we think are absolute. Maybe they'll find ways to slow down entropy increase, to harvest energy from exotic sources we haven't imagined, to transition to forms of existence that don't require the thermodynamic conditions life currently needs. Hawking didn't rule out these possibilities, but he didn't find them likely based on current physics. More plausibly, he suggested, advanced civilizations might try to escape their dying universe by creating new universes. If the total energy of a closed universe is zero, as Hawking calculated, then creating a universe doesn't violate energy conservation. Maybe sufficiently advanced technology could trigger the formation of a new space-time, a new Big Bang, with new physical laws where consciousness and structure could exist again. This is speculative, bordering on science fiction, but it's grounded in Hawking's serious physics. If universes can spontaneously appear from quantum fluctuations, as his no-boundary proposal suggests, then maybe they can be deliberately created. And if so, maybe the ending of time in our universe doesn't mean the ending of time absolutely, just the ending of this particular instantiation of it. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments one more time if you haven't already. I want to know where this global conversation about time's mortality is happening. Are you contemplating the end of everything from New York, New Delhi, Sydney? Let me know. Another aspect of time's ending that Hawking explored is what it means for causality. Our entire understanding of physics is based on cause and effect. Events in the past influence events in the future. But at time's ending, this structure breaks down. In the Big Freeze, there are no more events, so causality becomes meaningless. In the Big Crunch, space-time itself ends, so there's no framework for causality to operate in. In the Big Rip, causal connections are severed as space tears apart. This suggests that causality, like time itself, is not fundamental. It's an emergent feature of a universe in a particular state, a state with ordered time, structure, and the ability for information to propagate. When that state ends, causality ends too. This is deeply unsettling because it undermines the notion that effects must have causes. At time's ending, effects without causes might be possible, or the concept of cause and effect might simply not apply. Hawking also considered whether time's ending could be cyclical. Could the Big Crunch lead to a new Big Bang? Could the universe bounce, time reset, and a new era of cosmic history begin? This is the cyclic model of cosmology, and Hawking explored it seriously. The mathematics is tricky. At the singularity of a Big Crunch, our equations break down. We can't reliably predict what happens. Maybe the universe bounces, maybe it doesn't. Maybe our universe is one in an infinite series of expansions and contractions, each with its own arrow of time, its own history, its own ending that leads to a new beginning. Hawking was attracted to this idea because it avoids the question of ultimate origins. If time is cyclic, there's no first moment, no ultimate beginning or ending, just an eternal cycle. But he also recognized the problems. Each cycle should increase total entropy. Eventually, the cycles should run down. Also, what mechanism causes the bounce? We don't have a theory of quantum gravity that can reliably describe it. His final position was agnostic. Cyclic cosmology is possible but unproven. Time might end absolutely, or it might reset and continue in a new form. The mathematics doesn't yet give us a definitive answer. This uncertainty, Hawking believed, is where future physics will make progress. Understanding what happens at time's ending requires the theory of quantum gravity we're still developing. Let me take you deeper into what Hawking called imaginary time, one of his most mind-bending concepts. In his no-boundary proposal with James Hartley, Hawking suggested that near the beginning and possibly the ending of the universe, time behaves differently. It becomes imaginary in a mathematical sense, which means it behaves more like a spatial dimension. In imaginary time, the distinction between past and future breaks down. You can move in any direction, like in space. There's no arrow of time, no preferred direction. And crucially, there's no boundary, no edge, no first or last moment. The universe is finite in imaginary time, but has no boundary. Like the surface of a sphere is finite, but has no edge. This framework suggests that asking what happens when time ends might be the wrong question. In imaginary time, time doesn't end. It loops back on itself or connects smoothly to other dimensions. The ending of time is an artifact of viewing the universe in ordinary time. In imaginary time, there's no beginning or ending, just a closed, self-contained geometry. Hawking found this mathematically elegant, but he struggled with what it means physically. Is imaginary time real, or is it just a calculational tool? If it's real, what does it mean to exist in imaginary time? These questions remained unresolved at his death, part of his unfinished quest to understand time's ultimate nature. Another profound implication Hawking explored is what time's ending means for the past. We think of the past as fixed, unchangeable, something that happened and is now crystallized in history. But in some of Hawking's models, particularly his top-down cosmology, the past is selected by the present. The present state of the universe, including the fact that it's heading toward a particular ending, determines which of many possible pasts actually occurred. In this framework, time's ending retroactively shapes time's beginning and everything in between. The fact that time will end in a big freeze, crunch, or rip influences what the Big Bang was like, what physical laws emerged, what structures formed. The ending and the beginning are connected, not as cause and effect, but as boundary conditions that mutually constrain each other. This is such a radical departure from our normal thinking about time that most physicists still struggle with it. We want time to flow in one direction, past to future, cause to effect. But Hawking's mathematics suggests reality is more subtle. Time might be more like space, where every point is equally real, and the structure as a whole determines what happens at each point. If this is true, then time's ending has always been part of the universe's structure. It's not something that will happen in the distant future. It's a feature of space-time geometry that's always been there, shaping cosmic history from the beginning. Every moment you've ever experienced exists in a temporal structure that includes its own ending, and that ending influences everything, even the past. Let me ask you something personal. How does it feel to contemplate time's ending? Not just intellectually, but emotionally. Does it create anxiety, wonder, indifference, motivation? I'm genuinely curious because I think our emotional responses to cosmic mortality reveal our deepest values and assumptions. Share your feelings in the comments. Hawking also explored the connection between time's ending and the anthropic principle. This principle says we necessarily observe a universe compatible with our existence, because if it weren't compatible, we wouldn't be here to observe it. Hawking extended this to time's ending. We necessarily exist during an era when time is meaningful, when change is possible, when structure can form and persist. This means that observers can never directly witness time's ending. By the time conditions deteriorate to the point where time becomes meaningless or ceases to exist, there are no observers left to witness it. Time's ending is always beyond the horizon of possible experience. We can calculate it, predict it, understand it mathematically, but we can never see it happen. This is simultaneously frustrating and profound. Frustrating because it means we can't empirically verify our theories about time's ending. Profound because it highlights the special nature of our cosmic moment. We exist in the narrow window between time's beginning and ending, when observation, understanding, and consciousness are possible. That window will close, not for us individually, but for the universe as a whole. Hawking believed this should motivate us to make the most of the time we have. Not in a carpe diem, live for today sense, but in a broader, cosmic sense. Humanity's existence and the existence of any consciousness anywhere is a temporary gift. We have an opportunity, unique in cosmic history, to understand the universe, to experience it, to give it meaning through our awareness. When time ends, that opportunity ends forever. This is why Hawking spent his life doing physics despite his devastating illness. Time is precious. The opportunity to know, to understand, to push the boundaries of what's comprehensible, that opportunity won't last, not just for individuals, but for the universe itself. By doing science, by discovering the laws that govern reality, we're fulfilling the universe's potential to know itself during the brief window when such knowledge is possible. let me bring this toward a conclusion with one final aspect of Hawking's thinking about time's ending. The possibility that we're wrong about everything. Hawking was humble enough to acknowledge that our current theories might be completely off base. Maybe time doesn't end in any of the ways we've calculated. Maybe there are phenomena we haven't discovered that change everything. Maybe quantum gravity will reveal that time is more robust, more fundamental, more eternal than our current understanding suggests. He emphasized that the scenarios he described, Big Freeze, Big Crunch, Big Rip, are based on our current best physics. But physics has been revolutionized before. Newton's mechanics seemed complete until relativity. Classical physics seemed complete until quantum mechanics. Our current theories seem powerful, but they have gaps, particularly the lack of a quantum theory of gravity. When we develop that theory, it might completely change our understanding of time's ending. Maybe time doesn't end. Maybe it transforms into something else we can't currently conceive. Maybe the question itself is based on false assumptions. Hawking welcomed this possibility. Science advances by overthrowing established ideas, and he hoped his work on time's ending would eventually be superseded by something deeper and more true. But until that happens, we have to work with the physics we have. And that physics clearly indicates that time, like everything else in the universe, is temporary. It had a beginning, it's unfolding now, and it will have an ending. The exact nature of that ending is uncertain, but its inevitability seems clear. So what happens when time finally ends? Hawking's answer: it depends on which scenario unfolds, but in every case, something profound and irreversible occurs. Either time becomes meaningless as the universe reaches heat death and nothing can ever change again, or time is compressed out of existence as space-time collapses into a singularity, or time fragments and breaks down as space itself is torn apart. In every scenario, the temporal structure that makes your existence possible, that allows you to read these words and think these thoughts, comes to an end. This isn't depressing, it's clarifying. Time is a gift, and like all gifts, it's temporary. What you do with it matters precisely because it won't last forever. Every moment is irreplaceable. Every choice is significant. Every experience is unique. Not just for you individually, but for the universe as a whole. Before we close, make sure you're getting everything from this content. If this video changed how you think about time, existence, or your place in the cosmos, hit that like button. If you want more content exploring the deepest questions at the intersection of physics and philosophy, subscribe and turn on notifications. Share this video with someone who's ready to confront the most ultimate question there is: what happens when time itself finally ends? Stephen Hawking gave us the tools to think about time's mortality. He showed us that time is not eternal, not absolute, not independent of the physical universe. It's a feature of a particular cosmic epoch, and that epoch will end. When it does, time ends with it, not with a bang or a whimper, but with something far stranger: the cessation of the very possibility of bangs, whimpers, or anything else happening. You're living in time right now. You're experiencing the flow from past to future. You're part of the cosmic story that began with the Big Bang and will end with some form of universal death. That story is finite. Its ending is inevitable. But right now, in this moment, the story is still being written. You're part of it, And that participation, that existence within time while time still exists, is the most precious thing there is. Thank you for taking this journey to time's ending with me. Drop your thoughts, your feelings, your questions in the comments below. Subscribe for more content that explores the biggest questions physics can ask. And remember, time is finite, but right now it's yours. What you do with it, how you experience it, what meaning you extract from it, that's up to you. But do it now, while time still exists, because one day, in the unimaginably distant future, time itself will finally end. And when it does, the opportunity to exist, to think, to feel, to know, will be gone forever. That's not a tragedy. It's what makes this moment and every moment infinitely valuable. Stephen Hawking understood this. He lived it despite facing his own mortality daily. And now you understand it too. Time will end, but not yet. Not yet.